Well, let's talk about the debates. There is a lot to cover when it comes to the debates, so I just really want to stick to a couple of main points that I took away from it. Obviously, just kind of the overview was night one was the big ideological debate. You had Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, holding the fort down, really exposing the difference between a progressive and a non-progressive, mainly when it came to their healthcare proposals. Those two are for Medicare for all, and pretty much everybody else on the stage was for some sort of Medicare for all who want it, which is Pete Buttigieg's plan. And I think that this really showcased the differences between a progressive and a non-progressive, and I really loved that those two they stuck together and they held the fort down and they did not attack one another, and they just really stuck to policy. My big takeaway from night one was I really wish Andrew Yang was on that stage, because Andrew Yang, now he did great night two, but Andrew Yang is also a wonky policy guy. He can rival Warren and Sanders. It would be great to see the three of them having a conversation, just a non-debate style, take each other down. But it would be great to see the three of them in an interview together where the three of them just talk policy. And that's videotaped and we can all see it. And I'm sure it would last a couple of hours, but it would just be such a great thing to see. So I feel like Andrew Yang was a little bit of a fish out of water on night two during the knife fight. But, he tried to kind of say, wait, but policy, wait, but ideas, when everybody else was going after each other. So it would have been kind of nice to see him on night one. My other real, the one big thing I want to say about my takeaway after night one was, and after watching the debates in June, is if you're a registered Democrat, now I'm not, but if you are a registered Democrat, what you need to do is you need to write the DNC or tweet the DNC or call them, I don't know how you get a hold of them, whatever you need to do, and scream that you absolutely no longer want these news networks to be in charge of the debates. Now, they can air the debates, that's fine, but they cannot be in control of the conversation. They cannot be the ones asking the questions, because what they're doing is they are making the Democratic Party look insane. The questions they ask, especially night one, they were a little better night two, because night two was a different dynamic. But from NBC asking the questions and having all of these guys raise their hands, and CNN on night one of this round of debates, they're controlling the narrative of the Democratic Party. They're making the Democratic Party seem outrageously insane, and they need to be stopped. We have to remember that network news is trying to make a profit. They are not your friend. They are not your ally. As much as you might think CNN and MSNBC are your friends and they're on your team, they're not. They're on the team of making money. They're for ratings. They're for money. That's what they're about. They're for sensationalism, and they are not for really, truly advancing the conversation for the benefit of the greater good. That is not what they're doing. So what they do is they ask these ridiculous questions. Like NBC would have everybody raise their hand. And it was like, raise your hand if you want to make border crossings, if you want to eliminate the laws that make border crossings illegal. And it puts these politicians in this situation where they're like, okay, do I raise my hand and explain the nuance later? Or do I not raise my hand and potentially and then explain the nuance later, right? Because none of them really, except maybe Castro, take such a firm line on that. Everybody's got nuance. Same thing when they ask these questions about Medicare for all, and they say, raise your hand if you would eliminate private insurance. And then you had all these kind of weird hand raise or no or maybe or I don't know, because everybody's got a nuanced idea on that. Even Bernie Sanders says, well, no, we can keep private insurance. They would just have to be covering things like cosmetic surgeries. So, also, one thing that really bothered me was when Anderson Cooper was questioning Pete Buttigieg, who I'm not a fan of Pete Buttigieg at all. And I do agree with Pete Buttigieg's answer. I just didn't like the way that Anderson Cooper asked it when he was saying, would you withdraw the troops from Afghanistan in your first year as president? Now, look, I think I agree with that policy. Tulsi Gabbard also takes the same stance that she would withdraw the troops her first year in Afghanistan. But the reality is that Anderson Cooper should not be the person holding it's like, where did that idea come from? First of all, which candidate said it to where Anderson Cooper felt like he could ask that question, and then to double down and say in your first year. So all of a sudden now you've got Anderson Cooper controlling U.S. foreign policy, because if Tulsi Gabbard becomes president, now he didn't do this to her, but let's say it's Pete Buttigieg. Let's just say in some weird backwards world he becomes president. And he gets in there and he decides not to withdraw the troops from Afghanistan in year one. He decides to go about it a slightly different way. Maybe it takes him 2 years to do. Then all of a sudden you've got the narratives coming out of people saying, well, he broke a campaign promise because he said that he would withdraw the troops from Afghanistan in 1 year. And it's like, well, was that a campaign promise of his? I don't really know, because I haven't studied his campaign that much. I'm not interested in him as much. Okay, if it is an actual campaign promise on his platform, then that's fair enough. But if it's just because they think it's a campaign promise because Anderson Cooper said, would you withdraw the troops from Afghanistan? And he says yes. And then he says, in your first year, all of a sudden now that is controlling U.S. policy. What does Anderson Cooper have? Why is he controlling U.S. foreign policy? Why is he controlling border policy? When they ask these questions like, would you make illegal border crossings no longer illegal? And then they hold these politicians to it because they're asking these kind of asinine, insane questions that don't allow for any room for nuance. All of a sudden, people are saying, well, you said you were going to do that. And it's not only the liberals that would say, well, you said you were going to do it, and so now you haven't, and so now you broke your promises. It's the Republicans that then latch on to these, and they say, oh my God, listen to them. This is what they're saying over there. These Democrats are crazy. They're so far left that they're saying that they would, do X, Y, and Z. So it is totally dangerous, and it is unfair. It's painting the Democratic Party to be much crazier than it actually is, when these networks are allowed to control the debate questions and essentially control the platform of the Democratic Party by asking these asinine questions. It is bad. If you're a Democrat, you need to scream about this. It cannot happen. Now, these networks they should be allowed to air the debates, but they should not be allowed to referee the debates. Imagine if the networks were allowed to referee sports games. I mean, think about this. If they were allowed to referee like the NBA playoffs would always go to Game 7. There would never be 4-game champions, because the networks would say it's in our financial benefit to ensure we always go to Game 7. So they would ref it and they would rig it in order to do that. And that's what the DNC is allowing for these guys to do. They're allowing them to ref these debates and rig them, and essentially rig the party and rig the narrative, and it shouldn't be allowed to happen. Now, I don't think the DNC would, then the question is, well, who would do it then? The DNC, because, they can't really be trusted. I understand that, but I'm telling you right now, network media also really can't be trusted. So it's a bad deal. We got to come up with a better way. That was one of my big takeaways from the debates, was that that's really bad. These networks should not be allowed to control these debates. They're in it for the money. They're in it for the clicks. They're in it for the sensationalism. Night 2, the knife fight. So the knife fight was so interesting because, everybody learned from the first round of debates, from Kamala Harris taking down Joe Biden, that was going to, they knew she was going to do it again. And so some of the others decided to take the same strategy. What we saw was Booker trying to get in there against Biden. You also saw de Blasio. This was really, he kept calling out Joe Biden. Clearly his strategy was, if he continued to call out Joe Biden, he knew the debate rules, that then they would have to go to Biden for him to be able to respond. And then they would go back to de Blasio and back to, he knew that every time he called somebody out on the stage, it would result in a back and forth and he would get more airtime. And that's what he did. And, nobody wants to hear from de Blasio anyway. So also Kirsten Gillibrand, she decided to jump in there and try to go after Joe Biden on his record with women and family and childcare. And then Tulsi Gabbard comes around the corner with her own knife like a ninja and stabs Kamala. They're all aiming at Joe Biden. And she comes around and goes, Kamala, I'm going to take Kamala out, which is such a smart strategy. And Tulsi Gabbard won the debate. She is the most talked about candidate during the debate. She was the most searched candidate. She is still the most talked about candidate after the debate. And it was because she was very smart on how she was going about this. And she decided to take out Kamala while everybody else was aiming for Joe Biden. Talk about a warrior, like that woman knows how to fight. Clearly, I mean, her soldier training is paying off. She understands strategy and she went after the enemy that wasn't looking, right? So good on her for that. And I'm going to do a longer video on that because now there's like this big back and forth, and Kamala Harris is doing this whole smear campaign to try to delegitimize Tulsi Gabbard. But the thing about night 2 and night 1, and my big takeaway after watching night 2 was, what kind of leader do you want for this nation? Because the way the debates played out show you exactly how a leader's energy can shift dynamics. And what I mean by that is the first night was about ideas, because the leaders on that debate stage were Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. And those two have ideas. So the discussion around those two leaders remained around ideas all night long. It was idea after idea after idea. Night 2, on the other hand, the main leaders that were on that debate stage were Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And I think particularly Kamala Harris, because she was on that stage, the energy shifted and everybody had to break out their weapons and aim them at one another. It became very hostile because she was on that stage. Now, if you took Kamala Harris off that stage, and you would also have to take off Joe Biden only because she attacked him in the first set of debates and everybody saw how effective that was. So they were all kind of trying that. But had she never done that, had she not been in the debates at all, then night 2 would have had a very different dynamic, because leadership is very important when it comes to shaping the way people interact with one another. When you have a bad boss, the whole work environment sucks. When you have a great boss, the work environment changes. And Kamala Harris shows us what kind of environment we would have in America if she became the president of the United States. It would be a knife fight all the time. And some people might say, well, that's good because she needs to take Trump down. But you're not going to beat Trump in a knife fight like this. Everybody already knows the dirt. You're not going to expose Trump to America. He's being exposed all day, every day. There is nothing you could say when you're standing on a stage with Trump that would be any different than what the media says to him every single day. So you're not going to have one of these aha moments, wow, you're not so great after all. When she calls out Joe Biden on busing, a lot of people didn't know that. When Tulsi Gabbard called out Kamala Harris on her record, on her prosecutorial record as Attorney General of California, a lot of people didn't know that. But everybody knows about Trump and all of his dirt. Everybody. So going after Trump in a knife fight, it hasn't worked at this point. It's probably not going to work when you're coming to debate time. You would have to get him on ideas. And that's what Hillary Clinton did not do. Hillary Clinton tried to have a knife fight with Trump and it didn't work. So Kamala Harris coming out with a bigger knife is still not going to work, because they're just going to come at her with a bigger knife. They don't care. His base doesn't care. His voters don't care. It's about the economy. It's about ideas. So you would have to put somebody like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, somebody with a lot of ideas against Trump, if you're wanting to defeat him in a debate. But ultimately, you've got to win over voters. And what I took away from night 2 of this debate was that Kamala Harris is not likable, and she creates an environment of hostility wherever she goes. And that is really problematic. If you're the president of the United States, it is not a prosecuting job. It isn't. You're not prosecuting anybody as president of the United States. You're leading a nation with ideas. That's the job. The other part of that job is diplomacy with world leaders. You're trying to keep the peace so we don't go to war. So she doesn't have any qualifications for those two big aspects of the job. You've got other people with qualifications. Tulsi Gabbard can be commander-in-chief. She understands diplomacy. She understands foreign policy. She understands that the big aspect, the most important job of the president is commander-in-chief, because they've got literal lives in their hands. And she understands this. Kamala Harris just because she's so hostile, I do think she would march us into a lot of war. I think she would just be like, well, we got to go after him. Well, we got to go after him. We got to go after him because that's what I do. She would sit down with world leaders, and rather than trying to be diplomatic with them, she might turn on them and say, well, look what you do and how you run your country. She might not be any better than Trump. In fact, she might be the exact same, because she's very hostile, just like he is. And that's why people think she would be great and why she'd defeat him. But once you get her in office, this is the dynamic she's going to create. And we saw it on that debate stage. So that was my big takeaway from night 2. Now, I'm going to do separate videos on Marianne Williamson, because I think Marianne Williamson, she persuaded me on the issue of reparations, and I want to talk about that. And then I do want to also talk about Tulsi Gabbard and this Kamala Harris feud, and how Kamala is now trying to smear Tulsi with Assad. So, but, that was just kind of my overall assessment with these debates. Contact the DNC, tell them that this is shit, that they cannot continue to allow network news media who is in it for the ratings and in it for the sensationalism to control the narratives, because they're going to control it for their favor. They're not thinking about you. They're not thinking about me. They're not thinking about the health of the Democratic Party. You also have to remember that news network media is absolutely thriving under Donald Trump. They have no desire for him to go anywhere. They really don't. They don't. If you don't believe me, you need to check yourself again, because believe me, I come out of mainstream media. I'm telling you that these guys are raking in the dough, hand over fist under Donald Trump. It is raining dollars, and they do not want that to end for them. So they are doing what they can to paint the Democratic Party to look like a group of lunatics. And it's a win-win situation for them. They continue to talk about, all the things on television and that they write about in the news. This is great, not only for CNN and MSNBC, but a lot of the mainstream outlets that we see online. They're all raking in hand over fist because they talk about the sensational stuff. Oh, he's a racist, he's a bigot, he's a xenophobe, look at all this stuff. And then they smear anybody with actually good policies because they want Trump to win. I'm telling you that now. So keep your eyes wide open, and we need to start screaming, saying, this is not what we want. This is not what we want. So, all right. Well, September, before I wrap this up, what is the status on the September debates? Well, here's the deal. And I was wrong in a previous video about Tulsi Gabbard. I thought that she had qualified a little bit further in the polls than she had. But, with the polls, it's like they say some polls are qualifying polls and then they change their mind So the way it is right now, where it stands, is 7 candidates have guaranteed they're on the debate stage in September. The rules now are you have to have both 130 individual donations, and you must make 2% in at least 4 of the big polls that they determine are the big polls. So the people who have made it are Joe Biden, Cory Booker, Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, Beto O'Rourke, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren. Close to making it is Andrew Yang and Julian Castro. They have both hit their donors, and they've hit 3 out of 4 of the polls. Now, I think Andrew Yang might make another poll after his performance on the debate stage, because he did a great job. His opening statement was killer. His closing statement was killer. I think he probably did nail it to where he could maybe move up in the polls. Castro, I'm not so sure. Klobuchar has hit the polls, but she's at 120,000 donations. So she's probably going to get that extra 10,000 donations between now and August 28th, I think is the cutoff. So she's probably in the debates as well. That makes 10. Now, Tom Steyer, Hickenlooper, and Tulsi are the others that are just slightly behind. So Tom Steyer has hit 2 of the polls out of the 4, but there's no word on donations. His campaign says that he'll make it. He'll make the donation threshold by the cutoff time, but, he hasn't even been in the debates. So it's going to be tough for him. Hickenlooper is probably out. Now, he has hit one of the polls, but so far he's really far off the mark on the donations. I think he only has, I don't think he has very many donations. Tulsi is getting closer. She's got one of the polls. She needs 3 more polls. I do think after her taking Kamala down will bring her up, and she might hit those 3 polls in the next week or 2. And she's at about 115,000 donations. So she needs 15,000 donations and 3 more polls in order to make those September debates. And she needs that to be done by August, end of August. So that is where we're at. So if you're new, donate to Tulsi Gabbard because, out of everybody who's close, she's the last of the progressives who hasn't made it. Andrew Yang is probably going to get there. So, and there's nothing you can do. It's just the polling numbers at that point. So that is where we're at. It looks like a lot of people are going to be out if they can't make those numbers by August 28th. So we will see, and I will keep you posted on that. So, all right. Thank you so much for watching.